Now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
Move that this House do now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for allowing this House an opportunity to consider banning imports of foie gras to the UK. While this has been an historic week with regard to European Union exit legislation, honourable and right honourable members will be aware that Brexit is also a significant opportunity to enhance animal welfare. Foie gras is a product derived from the livers of ducks or geese which have been force-fed maize repeatedly by having a metal tube inserted down their throats 2 or 3 times a day when they are just 12 weeks old. While production of this so-called delicacy, which is similar to pâté, has been banned in Britain since the year 2000, the fact that imports of it are allowed to the UK means that the suffering and mistreatment of animals continues. Our country, which imports around 180 to 200 tonnes of foie gras from mainland Europe each year, sadly continues to play its part in this cruel trade. I'm grateful for the work and diligence of organisations such as Animal Equality, who it was my pleasure to host in Parliament recently. Their campaigning on this issue goes back many years, and their investigative work has uncovered the reality of life before death for animals on foie gras farms, including the suffering which they have seen for themselves at such facilities in France and Spain. Madam Deputy Speaker, the production of foie gras is undertaken in 3 stages, each more brutal and inhumane than the last. The first stage starts right from when a chick is hatched, when they are fed regularly until they are aged between 6 and 9 weeks. The second stage then sees birds feed restricted for between 3 and 5 weeks. Following this, for the next 3 to 10 days, the birds are fed as much as possible. This is literally to prepare their bodies for further force feeding from the time they reach the age of about 12 weeks. The bird's esophagus is dilated, digestive secretions which are necessary for large amounts of food are stimulated, and the process of fattening the liver begins. By the end of this second stage, the liver can weigh up to 180 grams, more than double that of a duck which is fed naturally. The third stage commences when an animal reaches, as I say, the age of about 12 weeks, at which point the force feeding starts. This must be endured for a whole fortnight before the bird is slaughtered. Indeed, if this process lasted more than 2 weeks, it would likely cause the death of the bird due to liver failure. The force feeding increases dramatically a bird's liver size and fat content. At the end of the force feeding, a duck's liver is 7 to 10 times the size of a normal one, with an average weight of 550 to 700 grams and a fat content of around 55%. To put this into perspective, the average weight of a non-force-fed bird's liver is about 75 grams, with a fat content of just about 7%. At the end of this force feeding, the birds are then slaughtered and their oversized fatty liver is extracted. Given the clear mistreatment of animals which I've outlined, the production of foie gras in the United Kingdom would obviously be illegal. So should we not apply the values of animal protections to imports as well as domestic production? Yeah. Research undertaken has found that in the production of foie gras, birds are confined to small cages with little space, and they sometimes can't turn around. In some cases, dead birds remain in cages with the living. Ducks and geese display obvious respiratory problems, with evidence of trauma and inflammation of the esophagus, recognised by blood stains on force-feeding tubes. Often ducks bleed incessantly, and some of the weakest are left to die without any basic care. Each bird receives up to 200 grams of maize in a so-called meal, powered by a pneumatic or hydraulic pump. In the production of foie gras, this amount can be increased to 450 grams per meal towards the end of the force-feeding stage, rising to 1,000 grams after water is added to make a mash. This, of course, is much, much more food than they would naturally choose to eat themselves. I'd be delighted to.
Speaker, I thank him for giving way. I spoke to him beforehand in relation to the foie gras imports. Does the honourable member not agree that throughout the world countries enjoy different delicacies that we may not wish to partake of, and that we have a duty to understand how these delicacies are produced to judge if we want to try or not try? And the details of this delicacy have been so very well highlighted in great detail by the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the honourable member for his intervention, and indeed there are traditions and delicacies in many parts of the world, but I don't think that excuses the inhumane way that foie gras is produced, and it certainly is not a mainstream tradition in this country. I will indeed be honoured to give way.
Given way and for bringing this debate. He's excellent on animal welfare issues. And I think the issue is the decision has already been made in this country. We have banned this because it is morally unacceptable and it is cruel. A YouGov poll found that 77% of people support an import ban, and I think it would be much higher if the rest actually listened to what the honourable member has to say about the immense cruelty that's involved and the fact that basically they're eating a diseased organ. This product is the product of making the animal diseased. Yeah.
I'm grateful to the honourable lady, and I pay tribute to the work she has done on many animal welfare issues. Yes, indeed, this is quite a disgusting form of production, if I can call it that, and to eat a diseased organ, I think if more people appreciated that's what it is, then I'm sure that 77% of people in a recent poll who have expressed outrage at foie gras being allowed in this country would be even higher still. The Animal Welfare Act 2006 provides for 5 points which must be taken into account when focusing on an animal's needs. These are its need for a suitable environment, its need for a suitable diet, its need to be able to exhibit normal behaviour patterns, its need to be housed with or, as appropriate, apart from other animals, and its need to be protected from pain, suffering, injury and disease. As I've said, we could not produce foie gras in this country as it would contravene these points. So let us apply, as the honourable lady has said, these values to what is imported to our country as well.
Would my little friend give way?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to.
Thank you. To be honest, I knew foie gras was a horrid food, but I'm finding it really quite distressing hearing graphic detail what happened to these birds. How on earth can we have double standards in this country that says we understand it's morally reprehensible, we won't manufacture it here, but we'll still import it? This has surely got to change.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and I believe she is absolutely right. We are perhaps guilty of a double standard here, that sometimes we are willing to export cruel practices, and the same goes for a lot of fur production as well, to other countries, almost an out of sight, out of mind, but the cruelty sadly still goes on. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has been right to say that our exit from the EU must lead to wider changes about how our country works. And from the conversations that I've had with my own constituents and the correspondence I've received from them during the various stages of the legislation we've indeed been debating over the last 2 days, it's clear that ensuring enhanced animal welfare provisions after we've left the EU is a priority for many in Crawley and indeed, of course, up and down the country. It's these representations which are very much in my mind this evening, and as co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for animal welfare, it's these calls which I will continue to pursue. Indeed, the ability of our country to soon be able to take these decisions ourselves is an opportunity that I believe we really must seize. Madam Deputy Speaker, as the honourable lady was saying a few moments ago, polling has showed that under 10% of the public claim to consume foie gras, and there's an overwhelming support for an import ban. 77%, as the opinion poll referred to earlier, expressed an opinion that a ban should be in place. I'm pleased that the appetite for foie gras is reducing in this country. Information that I have researched with the House of Commons Library shows that the value of UK imports of fatty livers of geese and ducks has fallen by almost half in recent years, from £1.1 million in 2013 to around £600,000 last year. The net mass of these livers, which were imported, also fell in this time from some 150,000 kilograms to just over 100,000 kilograms. Foie gras is not, as the honourable gentleman said earlier, foie gras is not, therefore, important to British culture or cuisine. The government's position has been clear that while we are members of the European Union and Customs Union, we're unable to ban the import of foie gras and the UK to the UK under free movement of goods obligations. However, by leaving the single market, we'll be able to decide for ourselves whether our country takes a different approach. The Farming Minister, my honourable friend, the member for Camborne and Redruth, stated earlier in the year that, and I quote, "Were the UK to commit to continue following the rules of the single market, as proposed by some, it would not be possible to consider a ban on foie gras imports." Madam Deputy Speaker, indeed, the view of the government is that an attempt to have a unilateral ban on the import or sale of foie gras, while still EU members, would be legally challenged as contravening the provisions of the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU. And this country could then, of course, be referred to the Court of Justice of the European Union and face multiple damages and claims from importers, exporters and other foie gras traders. I'd be delighted to.
The honourable members made reference to the fact that many people are voting with their feet by not choosing to eat foie gras. Does he not think that better education amongst the wider public would actually lead to fewer people eating foie gras once they learnt of these disgusting sort of practices in how the livers are obtained and how they result in that area?
I appreciate the honourable gentleman's intervention, and he's right. Awareness in so many of these issues is absolutely important, and hence one of the reasons for this debate this evening and the many other efforts to ensure that, whilst not wanting to make people feel disgusted, definitely better informed in terms of what exactly is involved in the production of foie gras.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course, I'd be delighted.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Indeed, I wasn't going to take part in this brief debate. But isn't it an irony, actually, that foie gras is available? And many chefs say this tastes exactly the same as foie gras, and yet the animals are brought up humanely and killed humanely. So really, there is no excuse for having the import of foie gras.
My honourable friend from Lichfield is absolutely right. There are many more alternatives and more alternatives to different products that are cruelly produced coming on stream and available all the time. And certainly, again, that's an issue with regard to fur as well. Is something that there are alternatives that can be used. I very much welcome that the government are undertaking significant reforms in the field of animal welfare provision. Taking pride in our natural surroundings, enhancing the environment and ensuring suitable conditions for animals is something that I hope that we all have an interest in. I welcome the action being taken by my honourable friend and his departmental colleagues, particularly the Environment Secretary, as well as the leadership shown on the global stage by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. One such example is the ban on ivory sales announced to help protect the approximate 20,000 elephants which are slaughtered each year. Indeed, this week and next I have the honour of serving on the Bill Committee for this legislation. The government recently undertook a public consultation on banning live animal exports after we leave the European Union, and whilst the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs are currently considering the response, I hope that as part of these efforts, my honourable friend, the Minister, will ensure that both he and the Secretary of State's determination for ensuring that these standards are enhanced on Brexit for animal protections will be reflected in the further development of policy. The draft Animal Welfare, Sentencing and Recognition of Sentience Bill sets out that the government, and I quote, must have regard to the welfare needs of animals and sentient beings in formulating and implementing government policy, end quote. This reiterates that animals are sentient beings who feel pain and suffering, and I welcome that this principle will be written into UK law. Perhaps at this point, the Minister would be able to update the House when he speaks about when this legislation may be coming before us. And I wish to draw the House's attention to the issue of CCTV in slaughterhouses. Colleagues on both sides will welcome the government's work to make such equipment mandatory in England following the uncovering of the way some animals were mistreated in abattoirs before slaughter. In February 2015, I led an adjournment debate in this place, calling on the government to take action. And I would now urge ministers to replicate the zeal with which they have acted on matters such as this to ensure measures are taken in a timely manner to end foie gras imports to this nation, I believe still a nation of animal lovers. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the many organisations and institutions which have banned the sale of foie gras. Here in the UK Parliament, as well as, for example, at the BAFTAs and Brit Awards, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships, which I'm sure will please Mr Speaker, and Lord's Cricket Ground have all stopped selling foie gras, as have caterers such as Compass Group and Breaks, and retailers including Selfridges and Harvey Nichols here in London. Hotels, restaurants and many chefs across the country continue to take a stand, and indeed His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales has banned foie gras from the menus of royal events. We know that the treatment of animals with methods such as those used to produce foie gras are wrong. They were outlawed, as we have been discussing, almost 2 decades ago now in this country, but by permitting imports of this product, we are still helping the trade in this cruel practice to continue, even though we may not wish it to. Madam Deputy Speaker, when securing our animal welfare protections for after we leave the EU, I hope the Minister will take into account the points which have been raised this evening by many honourable members. In the months and years ahead, as Brexit takes effect, we'll have the ability to introduce a ban on imports of foie gras, which will sit alongside the decision this country took to ban its production domestically. I welcome the continued work from this government to protect and enhance animal welfare standards, and I urge for this ban to be brought into place. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, foie gras is cruel to produce. It's unhealthy to eat, and it's expensive to purchase. The ultimate cost, though, is paid by the ducks and geese who suffer so greatly before their slaughter, and it's time we banned this outdated practice.
Minister George Eustace.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, for a characteristically passionate speech on an important issue surrounding animal welfare. He does a great deal on many animal welfare causes and has done so again this evening. The UK is a world leader in animal welfare standards, and we take great pride in the way we tackle serious issues around animal cruelty. Our policies on animal welfare are driven by our recognition that animals are indeed sentient beings, and we are acting to reduce the harm to animals, whether they are on farms or to pets or in the wild. Now, my honourable friend asks when we will be bringing forward the bills that we've promised on sentencing and on extending sentencing for animal cruelty and on animal sentience. We've published our proposals on these. We currently envisage that the bill introducing higher sentences will come forward in this session, and soon thereafter we will be bringing forward the animal sentience bill to ensure that those provisions are in place in time for leaving the EU. We are also undertaking, as he pointed out, a programme of reforms to safeguard and enhance the welfare of animals. For example, we've made CCTV mandatory in all slaughterhouses, a requirement which goes above and beyond any EU law. The animal activities licensing regulations modernise controls on dog breeding, pet sales and other local authority licensed activities involving animals, and these were introduced or come into force in October. We're also bringing in legislation, as I said, to increase the maximum sentences for those who abuse animals, and we are at the forefront of international efforts to protect the interests of animals. For example, we recently introduced legislation to ban UK sales of ivory to help bring an end to elephant poaching. On farm animal welfare, we've been strengthening the statutory guidance codes in the form of a new enhanced meat chicken welfare code, which came into force earlier this year, and we are updating laying hen welfare codes, which was laid in Parliament on the 5th of June, and there is a new pig code to follow. So a great deal has been done, but turning to the issue of foie gras, the issue of tonight's debate. This, and I think my honourable friend gave some very graphic accounts of some of the welfare problems with this, which is why, as he points out, it is not permitted and would be a breach of UK law. At the moment, around 98% of duck foie gras imports into the UK come from France. UK imports of duck foie gras in 2017 was a little over 100 tonnes, and as my honourable friend pointed out, this has fallen considerably in recent years as attitudes change. France actually produces around 83% of the world's duck foie gras and 25% of the world's goose foie gras. And it's also produced in smaller quantities in some other member states such as Hungary, Bulgaria, Spain and Belgium. French law states that foie gras belongs to the protected cultural and gastronomical heritage of France. Now, the government has made clear that the production of foie gras using forced feeding or gavage raises serious animal welfare concerns. Foie gras literally translates to fatty liver, and it's produced, as my honourable friend pointed out, by force feeding ducks or geese large amounts of feed via a tube inserted into the esophagus twice to 3 times a day for a period of 2 to 3 weeks before they are slaughtered. In its 1998 report, the European Commission's Scientific Committee on Animal Health and Animal Welfare concluded that force-feeding animals is detrimental to the welfare of the birds, and they introduced EU Directive 98/58/EC. So it's a reasonable question to ask to why production is still allowed to continue in the EU given this directive. That directive concerning the protection of animals kept for farming purposes reflects the recommendations made under the European Convention for the Protection of Animals Kept for Farming Purposes, which allows for foie gras production to continue where it is a current practice, as long as the producing countries encourage research on its welfare aspects and on alternative methods which do not include force feeding. Practices relating to religious rights, cultural traditions and regional heritage are also respected under Article 13 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Now, as my honourable friend pointed out, there is no foie gras production in the UK. It is banned as it is incompatible with domestic legislation. While there is no specific legislation banning production of foie gras by force feeding, the prevention of unnecessary suffering to animals has been recognised since the Protection of Animals Act 1911. Currently, foie gras production by force feeding would be banned by the general provisions in the Animal Welfare Act 2006. The Act makes it a criminal offence to allow an animal to suffer unnecessarily and places on people who are responsible for animals a duty requiring them to do all that is reasonable to ensure the welfare of their animals. This includes an animal's need for a suitable diet and to be protected from pain, suffering, injury and disease. In addition, the Welfare of Farmed Animals England Regulations 2007 specifically states that animals must be provided with food and liquid in a manner that does not cause them unnecessary suffering or injury. If any production were to occur in the UK, the Animal and Plant Health Agency would be asked to investigate and advise on any contravention of UK animal welfare laws. Now, I understand the strength of feeling on this issue and appreciate the work that my honourable friend and many others have done to raise awareness. Successful lobbying and consumer pressure has meant that many UK restaurants, several councils, shops such as Selfridges, Harvey Nichols, Sainsbury's and Waitrose, and indeed both Houses of Parliament, have long stopped selling foie gras produced by force feeding. I should briefly mention that there are a small number of producers who produce what's known as ethical foie gras, something that was alluded to by my honourable friend, the member for Lichfield. And this is where the birds are not force-fed, but are allowed to naturally eat as much food as they wish. I do understand that there are some producers of this, particularly in Spain and in Canada, and they simply provide an abundance of food but do not engage in force feeding. Currently, production is at a very small level. I think there's only 1 or 2 Spanish farmers who engage in this. But this is an area that those countries who currently produce foie gras may want to consider further. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to link this issue back to the issue of Brexit and the European Union, since we've not had enough today of discussing the European Union, and it's time for, in the remaining minutes, to have some more time. While we are a member of the European Union, as my honourable friend pointed out, we are required to observe law which places restrictions on the introduction of measures that impair the movement of goods within the EU market. And Article 34 of the Lisbon Treaty prohibits quantitative restrictions. There are some circumstances on which you can apply restrictions, but under Article 114 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, in reality, any such measures, if they affect another member state, would need to be agreed by the Commission, and the Commission would not agree those without the consent of the other member states. When we leave the European Union, we do indeed have an opportunity to look at restrictions on sales along the lines that my honourable friend pointed out. We know that there are no barriers under WTO law, something that's sometimes raised by some people. There are clear precedents for putting in place ethical bans when it comes to WTO law, and indeed some countries, notably India, have indeed already brought forward bans on the sale of foie gras. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, there are other things that we are able to do in the future as we leave the European Union. We will regain our own independent seat on OIE, the international body that deals with animal health and welfare issues, and it is our intention to have a stronger voice for the UK to agitate for animal welfare issues and changes in animal welfare regulations and attitude towards animal welfare in other countries around the world. And we will be able to make that case to promote the production of ethical foie gras for those people who want to consume it, but to do all that we can to get other countries to adopt the type of legislation and the sorts of bans that we have here in the UK. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we've had a very interesting debate, a number of thoughtful interventions after a long day in this House, which shows the passion that people have for animal welfare issues. This is an issue on many, many fronts, as I pointed out at the beginning of my remarks, where there is growing interest both in Parliament and in the country. And my honourable friend has done a great job this evening of highlighting another important issue.